In my book Atlantis from a Geographer's Perspective, Mapping the Fairyland, I conclude that Plato, beyond reasonable doubt, based the geographic description of Atlantis on Ireland. My hypothesis was founded on the similarity in extent of the megalithic tombs, that is, tombs built of large stones, and the empire of Atlantis according to Plato. Ireland is the only large island in the Atlantic Ocean with megalithic tombs in all parts, and that was the basis for the identification. The hypothesis was tested by comparing the dimensions and the landscape. Both Ireland and Atlantis feature a central plain surrounded by mountains. To show it clearer, the vertical dimension is here exaggerated 10 times. The significant conclusion is that the geography of the island of Atlantis was based on that of Ireland. Note that this is a very different proposition from saying that Ireland was Atlantis. Still, if we turn to archaeology, the megalithic passage tombs of Newgrange and Knowth could be the model for the temples of Atlantis. The simple pattern created with stones of different colors on the facade of the buildings on Atlantis is present on both Newgrange and Knowth. Since this facade collapsed some 2000 years before Plato lived, he cannot have got the information from the Phoenicians who traded with Ireland in his own time. Now, the main temple on Atlantis was a palace for the river god Poseidon. Newgrange, locally called Bruna Boyne, which means mansion of the Boyne, is associated indirectly with Nechtan, the god of the spring, from which the river in front of the temple flows. A second temple on Atlantis was a temple both for Poseidon and for their earthborn mother, Cleito. This could match Knowth, a passage tomb with 2 passages, apparently one for a male and one for a female divinity. Plato's Atlantis also featured a low hill, which could match the King's Tara, the legendary seat of the High King of Ireland. It has archaeological roots dating back to 2800 BC, when this passage tomb was built as the last one on Ireland. Tara thus dates to the very end of the megalithic period, contemporary with the construction of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. Tara features a number of earthworks, and one in particular has 3 concentric ditches. The same pattern is found on the stone altar in the passage tomb of Knowth, established around 3800 BC. This symbol was obviously an important one in their culture. It may therefore be significant that the symbol matches Plato's description of the most holy place in Atlantis, the citadel created by Poseidon. The procession road at Tara has a counterpart in the man-made canal to the sea in Atlantis. Also the pillar on which the Atlantean kings sacrificed an oxen and on which the law was inscribed has a potential counterpart in the Irish Stone of Destiny. The Stone of Destiny was brought to Ireland by a people of great skills, known as the Tuatha De Danann, meaning people of Dana. Folklore has it that the Tuatha De Danann were the ancestors of all druids on Ireland, but also that they eventually made themselves invisible and live on as the fairies inside the old mounds. So while Atlantis has been called the Fairyland, perhaps it actually is the Fairyland. Legend says that the Tuatha De Danann came to Ireland from the north in a mist with ships that sailed through the sky, and that their homeland now is under the water. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if their homeland could be identical to the sunken island of Atlantis. If so, we have to look north from Ireland. Most areas that can be reached if sailing north from Ireland have been rising from the sea since the Ice Age. Only the southern North Sea has been sinking in the sea. And, indeed, in the central North Sea there was an island that sank. Now 15 meters below the waves, it is known as Dogger Bank. The southwestern end of Dogger Bank was separated from Britain by a narrow and deep sound, Outer Silver Pit. Archaeologists have concluded that one spot in particular offered very favorable conditions. On the southwestern plain of Dogger Bank, below the slope where they were protected from the north wind, and near the water with plentiful marine food resources. This area is today surrounded by oil fields, and with the modern three-dimensional seismic surveying techniques, oil explorers have discovered a meteorite impact crater in this area. Through differential compaction, the circular structures have migrated upwards, so they may have been manifest on the ground surface during the Ice Age. The dimensions of this subsurface structure is consistent with the dimension of the citadel of Atlantis. The central uplifted area is surrounded by a natural ditch of exactly the right diameter. The location of the crater is consistent with the location given by archaeologists, and it appears consistent with what Plato wrote about it being protected from the boreal winds and about the distance from the sea. The circles were created by the god Poseidon in Atlantis, according to Plato, which is to say they were natural. The canal to the sea, on the other hand, was man-made. For visual clarity, only 2 rings are shown here, and the vertical scale has been exaggerated. Some may object that Atlantis has to be one place or no place. It cannot be a mixture of several places. However, that is not how oral tradition works. Folklore is able to remember dramatic events, but is less trustworthy about where it happened, when it happened, or to whom. When the person or place of a tale is no longer known to the audience, the storyteller may well substitute something more familiar. That may be what has happened here, since parts of the geography match Ireland and others do not. The key is that there must be a continuum in time and space in the story, such as a migration of people that passed each of the places mentioned at the times when the different events took place. In this hypothesis, the people of Dana brought the tale from the North Sea to megalithic Ireland, a culture that overlapped the old kingdom of Egypt in time. There it was written down, and a couple of thousand years later the Greek statesman Solon brought the story to Greece. But let's get back to the story. Although this was the best place to live in northwestern Europe at the time, we must not forget that we are still in the Ice Age. This temperature curve shows how the Ice Age ended with an abrupt global warming some 11,600 years ago, 9,000 years before Plato. So when did this plain sink? The sea level curve shows a sudden rise at the end of the Ice Age, which would have drowned the plain since it is at about 50 meters below the present sea level. It thus appears that it sank at the time mentioned by Plato. However, Plato said that it sank in a single day. Could this sea level rise have risen that fast? The process capable of causing the most dramatic sea level rise is a giant outburst flood from the North American ice sheet, or a Jökullaub with the Icelandic term. According to this theory, enormous amounts of water can accumulate beneath a floating captured ice shelf. In fact, the largest subglacial lake that exists today, Lake Vostok in the East Antarctic, is a captured ice shelf, and it may create a Jökullaub. But the Ice Age Jökullaubs flowing from the Hudson Bay area in Canada were about 100,000 times larger than the one that can burst from Lake Vostok. The water will have flowed under the ice ceiling towards the ice edge, followed first the Missouri River, then the Mississippi. Although geologists have inferred them for decades, it is only recently that a theoretical explanation has become available. When the Jökullaub reached the Gulf of Mexico, The high sediment concentration made it denser than the seawater. It followed the continental slope down to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Warm surface water was pressed out, according to a new study that suggests that this is what caused the end of the Ice Age. Hundreds of meters of sediments were deposited in a short time on the Mississippi submarine fan. It consists of 8 canyons and 8 fan sequences, all accumulated during the Ice Age period. However, not even this dramatic process is likely to raise the sea level fast enough. Only if a protective dike was overtopped can the destruction have been so sudden. Furthermore, Plato said that the island, not just the city, was drowned, and that only a bank of mud remained. If you recall, there was a sudden second sea level rise. It so happens that Dogger Bank was a low island at that time, but there was something else that happened. Around 8,000 years ago, a submarine scree occurred at Storegga off Norway. This was one of the largest submarine screes known to have occurred. It set off a tsunami that went tens of meters up on land. The seabed north of Dogger Bank slopes gradually to the north and the location of the Storegga scree. That is the worst possible situation, as the tsunami can then grow to a roaring wall of water. When it came, only the flat higher parts of Dogger Bank were above sea level. The tsunami may well have overrun the entire island and destroyed it in a single day, just like Plato wrote. However, the tsunami could not cause the sea level rise. In fact, the tsunami may have occurred shortly before the sudden sea level rise. The reason for the latter is that a giant meltwater lake over Canada, Lake Agassiz, burst out through Hudson Bay. The amount of water set free was equivalent to at least a foot of global sea level rise in a very rapid event. And thus it happened that a tsunami destroyed the low-lying island, and shortly after it sank in the sea. The strong tidal currents in the area have covered all what remains in sand. So even if we would remove the water, we would see nothing of the land of the dead under the sea. The land of the dead is of course our ancestors' land, and their sky is our sea. Doesn't it give a new meaning to the Irish legend that the Tuatha Dé Danann came sailing in the sky? It's exactly this kind of reinterpretation I'm referring to with the final words in my book.